Welcome back, viewers. Dave Epstein from the Post Pollock firm. Today, we are here to talk about El Jefe, the chief. And which chief? The chief of New York's police department, NYPD, who recently resigned amid allegations of workplace misconduct. Let's watch one of the recent news stories about this, and then I'll provide you some commentary.
Well, tonight, for the first time, the former NYPD Chief of Department Jeff Maddrey is responding to serious accusations. He resigned from the department after being accused of approving overtime in exchange for sex. He and his lawyer face cameras late this afternoon. Eyewitness News reporter Anthony Carlo is live in Lower Manhattan with much more on what they said. Anthony.
That's right. You could hear a pin drop in that room or right outside the law offices for former Chief Maddrey's legal team. Maddrey's lawyers say now that he's resigned and is retired, there's no more constraints, no more NYPD rules to follow. And so the gloves are off. During his time as NYPD Chief of Department, Jeffrey Maddrey served as a voice of authority. Today, he let his lawyer do the talking, accused of sexually harassing an NYPD lieutenant in exchange for approving an excessive amount of overtime.
Lieutenant Epps got caught with her hand in the cookie jar and is trying to deflect her wrongdoing.
The allegations in Lieutenant Epps' discrimination complaint are as follows. Between June 2023 and December 16, 2024, Maddrey exploited her emotional and financial vulnerabilities, as well as her history of childhood trauma, in order to coerce her into performing unwanted sexual favors.
Lieutenant Epps had a consensual adult relationship, albeit for a short time, with Jeff.
Maddrey's lawyers claim to have a plethora.
Let me stop right there, folks, because that right there, there's a problem for the chief. It was consensual. She was an underling. She was a subordinate. And this doesn't just apply to the chief of police in New York or any chief of police or any police department. It applies to any workplace situation. He is in a superior position. He has, in the eyes of the law, he has an unequal power position. So there's a sort of a presumption there that he can take advantage of that to coerce her into doing things that she might not otherwise do, aside from the fact that it's totally inappropriate in the workplace. But with that said, saying it's consensual, here's a rule of thumb to live by, folks. Whenever you say the word boss, fooling around, and either promoted or discharged or demoted in the same sentence, get your checkbook out, because you're going to be paying some lawyer for harassment suits. That is right there a problem. And it's not just a problem with the person who had the consensual relationship with you. There have been cases that allow others in the office who did not get promoted because they did not fool around with the boss to have a separate lawsuit to say that they were discriminated against based upon their gender and sexual activities. There have been cases that have allowed those people to sue the employer. And it is not just that employer, the boss, the chief here. It's the company. It's the entity. It's the NYPD. So everybody has to get their checkbooks out. So this business, it was consensual. Right there, avoid a relationship at your office or at your workplace like the plague. Even if you're equal levels, it's still frowned upon and it can create problems. But if it is between people at different levels of superiority in the chain of command, in the corporate chart, the corporate power chart, avoid it like the plague. It is fraught with peril. Let's see the rest of this story.
Relationship, albeit for a short time, with Jeff.
Maddrey's lawyers claim to have a plethora of evidence against the accuser to support that.
X-rated and racy videos and photographs from Lieutenant Epps, who is a self-professed swinger
Epps' attorney responding by calling Maddrey a clown and saying, quote, "We have a treasure trove of digital data that will hopefully bring this degenerate to justice." During the news conference, Maddrey's lawyer displayed a model of an NYPD overtime report and explained how OT is approved in an attempt to disprove that there was ever any quid pro quo sexual harassment.
Jeff never approves, assigns, or gives overtime.
Mr. Maddrey, why?
Maddrey, who resigned a week ago, left the news conference with his lawyers without answering any questions, but saying they are prepared to litigate every issue. Now, Lieutenant Quatisha Epps has been under internal investigation by the NYPD now for months after making about $200,000 in overtime last year. That investigation by Internal Affairs resulted in her suspension. She says she's been falsely portrayed as an abuser of overtime because she rejected former Chief of Department Maddrey's sexual advances. Tonight, Maddrey's lawyers say he had nothing to do with that.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's turning into the usual sexual harassment, workplace harassment, pardon my French, you-know-what show. Basically, he's going to accuse her of being a slut. She's going to say he's a degenerate. And it very often becomes a he said, she said case. But this case is a little different. He is admitting that he engaged in a consensual relationship with her. He's already behind the 8 ball in this lawsuit, because of the things that I told you before. He may very well be able to put in evidence the fact that she was a swinger, according to him. She will refute that. She says she has digital evidence, which I'm sure consists of texts, things like that of a very intimate nature, something that is totally inappropriate in the workplace. And anytime you have that, the consensual relationship, it doesn't matter if there's consent. It doesn't matter if this woman is loose, as he's going to describe her, has described her. I mean, yes, she got in trouble too for abusing overtime, but now she's turning around and suing him. Where that might come into play is how much damages a jury might award her. Because they're going to say she was taking part of this in this, and she was engaging in wrongful conduct too. But it doesn't necessarily get him off the hook. And as they say, folks, where there's smoke, there's fire. I would not be surprised to see other people show up and say he did the same thing to me, whether false, true, or something in between. This is the way these things happen. And he walked right into it, this guy, with a consensual relationship. Whatever they think they're going to show in this lawsuit, it's already lost. The police department, on the other hand, and the city may or may not have a defense. I don't know. The fact that he is the top guy, he's the chief. Well, he's not the commissioner. That's really usually the top person in a police department. But the fact that he's the guy who should be, at least in some respects, in charge of administering policies on workplace discrimination, harassment, things like that, and he's the one doing it, never bodes well for one of the defenses that an entity, an organization has, and that is we had in place policies to prevent discrimination, harassment, workplace harassment, what they call a hostile workplace environment. That's a very commonly used term. We had those policies, but you also have to show you enforced or implemented them. Now, when the person who's at the top of the chain is the one committing them, it's very hard to say we were enforcing them. What you're supposed to have is a personnel department that investigates these things and takes the appropriate steps to stop them. We don't know what happened in this case yet, so that'll remain to be seen. But the fact that the top guy, short of the commissioner, was engaged in acts of, at least he admits, consensual acts of intimacy, if you will, that means that they've already got a problem. There's a question, I suppose, of whether she reported this to people. Her lawyers say they have everything in the world on this guy. The question is whether she reported this harassment She apparently ran into trouble with the police department. There's a question of whether she did this reporting, if she did any reporting, before or after she got cited for abusing overtime. Now, in a police department, I do work with municipalities. There are both regulatory and statutory provisions about abusing overtime, abusing sick time, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea there is not to have those types of compensation abused because the public's paying for it. So you're paying somebody excessive amounts of overtime. It's not good. It's the public's money, and people are going to look into that. Then you have the other end of it where you have other employees who say, I wanted to be assigned the overtime work, and I didn't want to have to sleep with the boss. And that's, again, where those other claims can come in by other people who say, I wasn't given overtime, and apparently it turns out I should have been given overtime if I would sleep with the boss, which of course I didn't want to do, and that gives rise to a claim by those people. So again, the upshot of this case is, especially in public employment, this is a high-profile position, but any employment, if you're the boss, keep your relationships outside the office. The old saying, you don't mix your money with your honey. Well, this guy is finding out why that is such a true statement in the context of the law. So the obvious practical implications, folks, are that the city has a problem, not just the chief. And the question, aside from whether she reported this, is whether other people knew what was going on. And were they in a position where they had an obligation or a duty to report it or take action about it? Were there people in the HR or personnel department at the city who knew of this or had reason to know of it? And what actions were taken? All of that can come back to more liability being placed on the city or making this woman's case stronger. The other element of this, and really the chief should have thought of this, is when you get caught up in a situation like this, your chances of getting a new job, no less a job of a police force as large as New York, are nil. You're done. Now, looks like maybe he's near the age of retirement, so he doesn't care. But you can also, if the offenses are big enough, some of these offenses can turn into forfeiture of pension cases. If there are misconduct charges filed, I don't know if there were. Usually what happens is you are faced with, you resign or we bring misconduct charges against you. Now, a lot of municipalities will bring the misconduct charges anyway just to protect themselves, to show that once they knew of this problem, they did something about it, even if he offers to resign. But more often than not, they'll say, you resign, we will not bring misconduct charges. That doesn't solve the problem of the lawsuits, and it certainly doesn't solve the problem of whether or not he'll be able to get employment in the future. So in any event, folks, one thing you should take away or should not take away from this is that this is necessarily rampant in NYPD. There are many who would say that this is rampant in the workplace in America overall. Public and private employment, women still complain that there is harassment, inequality of bargaining power, inequality of pay, and that situations like this just reinforce the fact that despite years of efforts through legislation, through regulation, through enforcement, through private litigation, to stop this from happening, it still does. And here it's happening at the highest level in one of the largest police forces on the planet. I mean, this is NYPD. At the same time, this does not mean that all of NYPD is corrupt. Yes, the mayor has faced some legal problems. Yes, and he's a former police officer, by the way. And there have been other members of the police department who have fallen under the microscope of late, maybe even fallen under indictment. But this particular case is more about an individual who just did not know where the line was, or if he did, he didn't mind crossing it. And he looks like he's paid some of the consequences. He had to resign. I don't know what happens with his pension, but he's now going to face the consequence of a lawsuit. Now, the city will have to provide some defense for itself, and more often than not, per state statutes and regulations, they have to provide a defense to him. The logic there being that if he's left undefended, he can leave them out to dry. He says, I don't have any money, but I'll help you win a suit against the city. So they generally will provide a defense and try to cooperate with him, at least to whatever extent they can, whether it's them or their employment practices insurance carrier. They will have to team up with this guy. But it's not a good case. If they're smart, they'll settle this one and get it out of the way early and hope that an army of other women don't come along and make the same accusation. Let's hope, for the sake of the people of the city of New York, I have relatives who live there, that doesn't happen, that this was the one episode with this guy and this particular woman, and that there are no more claimants out there. Folks, I hope you learned something from this today. If nothing else, that, again, don't mix your money with your honey. Never works out well, and not just in a legal sense, in a lot of other ways that I don't need to tell you if you're adults. It can work out. Thanks for viewing us. Thanks for coming by. Please hit like and subscribe. And please leave your comments. I love responding to them. See you next time. Thanks.